In this video, we're going to look at 7 words connected with linguistics. And here are the 7 words. Analogy, nuance, coin, connotation, figurative, literal, and metaphor. So the first word is analogy. Analogy. If you make an analogy, or if you draw an analogy between two things, then you are saying that they are similar in some way. It's a very formal word used in formal writing. So, for example, the term social capital was coined by analogy with the conventional use of the word to mean financial assets. So there's a connection being drawn between social capital and financial assets. You can make an analogy between the courses of the planets and 2 trains travelling in the same direction. So if you want to explain to somebody the movement of the planets, you can use an example of 2 trains moving. You're making an analogy. You're making it easier for somebody to understand the movement of planets. And you can have an analogy with something, an analogy between 2 things, and you draw an analogy, and you can make a good analogy as well. So analogies is the plural form, and analogous is the adjective. So if one thing is analogous to another, they are similar. And some synonyms: comparison, similarity, resemblance, and parallel. You draw a parallel between 2 things. Here's your next word: nuance. Nuance. A nuance is a very small difference in the sound, the feeling, the appearance, or the meaning of something. It's a very subtle, very small difference. For example, the girl on the left is giving a very subtle message to the girl on the right. She's whispering. She's giving a nuanced view, a nuanced impression of something. We can use our eyes and facial expressions to communicate every subtle nuance of emotion there is. So if you raise your eyebrows, you're conveying surprise. It's a subtle nuance of meaning. If you read the Quran in translation, you miss the nuances of the original language. So translations of texts tend to miss the nuances of the original texts. So you can have a subtle nuance. This is a very common collocation with a nuance. You can have a nuance of language. You can understand a nuance. You can appreciate a nuance. And some synonyms: subtlety, hint. And the next phrase, coin. Coin. Now, of course, a coin is a piece of metal, which is money, but as a verb, if you coin something, if you coin a phrase, or if you coin a word, then you're the first person to say it. And here's a poet from maybe hundreds of years ago in the forests writing a poem, and she's the first person to coin a phrase. She's making something up. She coined the term virtual reality and pioneered its early development. Simone de Beauvoir first coined the phrase women's liberation in her book The Second Sex. So she was the first person to make the phrase, to invent the phrase women's liberation. So she coined a phrase. You can coin a word, and something can be coined by, so coin a phrase by, coined by. First coined. Shakespeare first coined lots of different phrases and words. And it's a verb, so coins, coined, coining as well. And some synonyms for coin: create, invent, come up with. And the next word is connotation. Connotation. The connotations of a particular word or name are the ideas or qualities which it makes you think of. Makes you think of ideas and qualities. So, for example, in Norse mythology, the Vikings, hell is the realm of the dead. But the name doesn't carry the negative connotations which Christianity later placed on it. So in Christianity, hell is a bad place. It has negative connotations. Urchin, with its connotation of mischievousness, may not be a particularly apt word. So the word urchin usually means a kind of homeless child, especially a boy, who maybe steals things. So it has a connotation of mischievousness. The words suggest something. They have a deeper meaning. You can have a negative connotation of a word. Sexual connotation. So connotation of a word, connotation of a term. And it's a noun, so connotations, negative connotations. And some synonyms: association, meaning, overtone, undertone. And the next word is figurative. Figurative. If you use a word or an expression in a figurative sense or a figurative way, then you use it in a more abstract or imaginative meaning than what it looks like. So, for example, if you use the phrase, "I'm so hungry, I could eat a horse," it doesn't mean you're really going to eat a horse. It just means you're really hungry. It's a figurative expression. I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Or, I will keep an eye out for him. It doesn't mean you're going to take your eye out. It just means you're going to look for him. It's a figurative phrase. We're in the same boat. Two people, we're in the same boat, may mean we have the same problem. We're not actually in a boat. It's a figurative phrase. It's not literal. Most poems are written in figurative language. It makes them hard to understand sometimes. It's an event that will change your life in both the literal and the figurative sense. So we talk about figurative language, figurative sense, figurative description, figurative image. Figurative is an adjective, so you can turn it into an adverb figuratively. I was speaking figuratively, not literally. So figurative synonyms: metaphorical, descriptive, fanciful. Slightly old-fashioned phrase, word that. Figure of speech as well we use. And here's the opposite of figurative: literal. Literal. So the literal sense of a word is its most basic meaning. You don't really have to think too much to get the literal sense of something. The people there are fighting in a literal sense for their lives. So then maybe there's a war going on. The concert ended with a bang in the most literal sense. So there literally was a bang at the end of the concert. A literal translation of the word is walls. So you can have a literal translation, literal interpretation, literal sense, literal meaning. And the adverb for literal is literally. And some synonyms: exact, actual, authentic, untarnished. And your next word, metaphor. Metaphor. A metaphor is a very imaginative way of describing something by talking about something else. Something which is similar. So, for example, if you want to say that somebody is very shy, very quiet and frightened of things, you might say that they are a mouse. Okay, you're a mouse. It means you're scared of things. It doesn't mean you're really a mouse. It means you're similar in some ways, some qualities to a mouse. Some example sentences. The writer's use of metaphor is very fitting for the topic. If you want to explore music as a metaphor for society, this book is the place to start. He goes further, extending the metaphor beyond the game itself to the business of the NFL. And some common collocations, a metaphor for something. A perfect metaphor, it's really, really good. A visual metaphor. A fitting metaphor. So a metaphor, it's a noun, so you can have metaphors, and an adjective, metaphorical. Metaphorical. So metaphor, metaphorical. Some synonyms, analogy, image, symbol, allegory. And so there are your 7 words for linguistics: analogy, nuance, coin, connotation, figurative, literal, and metaphor.